Great. Thank you so much, Ashley. And thank you everyone for joining us today. I know this is a busy time of the year and the semester for a lot of you, especially those who are in school right now. So really appreciate you taking some time out of your schedules to join us today and learn a little bit more about the topic, but also perhaps about the School of Engineering Education and our graduate programs. So I'm Professor Brent Jessic. I'm a faculty member in the School of Engineering Education at Purdue. I also have a joint appointment in the School of Electrical and Computer Engineering. And I'm presenting today in part because I'm the chair of the graduate program in the School of Engineering Education. So I would like to start out with a bit of an interactive activity, just kind of warm you up and hopefully engage you a little bit. So the starting question here is, what connections do you see between STEM fields and the social sciences? And when we say STEM, if you're not familiar with that term, typically what we're referring to there is science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. So if you'd like to put your ideas into the chat box, that would be great. I'll wait a few minutes. Again, there's no right answers, just looking for your thoughts on this topic. Thank you, Danielle. Thank you, Brooke. Any other ideas or thoughts on this question? Maybe one that some of you have thought about before, maybe not. All right, great thoughts. I'm still reviewing them here. Yeah, so lots of great insights here. I really appreciate many of you commenting on the ways that engineering and technology intersect with society, and definitely seeing social sciences as having something to do with that, thinking about the social dimensions or social impacts of engineering and technology. Also the role of the social sciences potentially in responding to societal needs. Also seeing comments here about maybe intersections having to do with marketing technology or marketing engineering projects. How do we communicate around science, technology, engineering, and mathematics? Fields like management have a big role to play at the intersection of engineering and the social sciences. The role of social sciences in sort of communicating STEM knowledge and STEM fields and maybe engaging people around STEM topics. And I really like Noah's comment here about viewing engineering as an applied social science. I'm not sure, I wholeheartedly agree with you. I'm not sure all of my colleagues in engineering would agree with that, but I think at the end of the day, yes, we often underestimate the extent to which engineering has, and the products of engineers and engineering have direct impacts on people and society in a lot of ways we often don't think about. So with that as sort of a warm-up, I want to present a couple of other examples from the research literature of intersections between engineering and the social sciences. So here's my first example. This is from the field of software engineering. This example was shared by one of our faculty members whose partner works in the computer engineering and computer science space and was involved in doing some research, academic research, on understanding decisions that are made by practicing software engineers. So what they did was they surveyed and interviewed software engineers to learn about their processes for deciding when and how to use a specific programming tool. And for those who are familiar with regular expressions or regexes, this is the specific tool that they're referring to. And the research found that most software engineers did not fully understand regexes and were likely to reuse existing code, which often resulted in security vulnerabilities. And again, so as you might imagine, this is an example of focusing on a fairly technical topic, this particular programming tool, but at the same time using social science research methods like surveys and interviews to collect information about how software engineers used or misused this particular type of programming tool. Here's an example from the field of civil engineering. This was a study focusing on the values of construction professionals. There's been a movement in the construction field. Construction companies have been trying to adapt their corporate practices to focus on general shifts in the workforce. So what researchers did was surveyed construction professionals to try to better understand their work values, especially across different generational groups. Interestingly, the results of this study revealed no significant differences in work values across generations, suggesting that the new practices might not have this sort of desired effects that the companies wanted to see. As a third example from the field of industrial engineering, researchers use stakeholder analysis and systems modeling to understand the impact of a specific intervention on infant mortality, and it was specifically focused on progesterone therapy. And as you might imagine, of course, the development of that type of treatment is a highly technical endeavor that involves science, medicine, perhaps some engineering as well. But actually implementing that therapy and understanding how it works in different settings and contexts and with different patients and patient populations often requires turning to other types of expertise, including social science research methods. So in this case, the researchers identified individual, organizational, and policy behaviors that were influencing this issue, allowing them to develop a more accurate systems model to predict the outcomes of the intervention. So again, another nice example of sort of working at the interface of science and medicine and the social sciences to improve the uptake and effectiveness of some particular kind of treatment. So what do all these cases have in common? Well, I would argue that on the one hand, they involve some kind of training, expertise, or context in engineering or some other STEM field. So there's expertise required, a setting, a topic, a focus that has a very strong connection to engineering or another STEM field. But that is also coupled with social science research methods in order to carry out the particular studies that are being described here. Now, in addition to these three examples, I would argue that engineering education represents another example of engineering meets the social sciences. So I'm going to spend the rest of my talk sharing with you some insights about what we do in the field of engineering education and what that might have to do with the social sciences. And it is very much a field at the intersection of those two areas. So one way of looking at engineering education as a field is that engineering education researchers ask when, where, how, and why people at a variety of relevant life or career stages, ranging from pre-kindergarten, very young children, through kindergarten to high school, through college, including undergraduate and graduate levels of education, and through one's career and professional practice. How and why do people discover engineering, learn to engineer, and or develop deep engineering expertise in a variety of both formal and informal learning environments? So as this overview suggests, the field of engineering education covers a very wide range of different settings and different types of populations, from sort of pre-engineers to perhaps late career, even retired engineers, and everybody in between, looking at who's in the field, where do they learn engineering, who leaves the field, how do people learn engineering, how do they develop expertise, why are they interested, why are they motivated, what do they do, all those types of things. So in our field, we very much, for many of us, bring together training and expertise in engineering, along with coupling that to social science research methods. And so just an example for myself, and I would say I'm somewhat typical in the field in terms of my background. My undergraduate training is in the field of electrical engineering with a focus on computer engineering. And my professional experience is primarily in the field of information technology and information systems. So I've worked professionally in that field for multiple years. When I was in graduate school, I did IT and IS support work. I still maintain websites and do some programming. But at the same time, my graduate studies are in a field called Science and Technology Studies, which is primarily a humanities and social science field. So I have this mix of both a technical background and technical expertise coupled with social science research skills. So what kind of social science research methods do engineering education scholars use? Well, some of the kinds of data that we collect and work with fall into these two categories. Many of us work with quantitative data. So what's quantitative data? Well, of course, if you're working in a technical field, quantitative data is typically numeric data. It's data that you can analyze using mathematics and statistics and those types of techniques. Well, for us, quantitative data often takes the form of numeric or other kinds of scale data based on, for example, assessment scores. So how do students perform on certain kinds of graded assignments or other types of assessment measures? We often use survey measures, and many of those survey measures are scaled and can be analyzed using statistical techniques. So if you've ever taken a survey that, for example, poses questions like, here's a statement. Do you agree or disagree? That's called a Likert scale. And often those Likert scales are on a range from 1 to 5, strongly disagree to strongly agree, with various levels in between. And we can really treat that as scaled data and numeric data, and we can analyze it statistically. Many of our colleagues also work with educational records, in some cases very large record sets, again, using quantitative approaches to model that data and look at things like student persistence and success, for example, in engineering courses or in engineering programs. We also have a lot of folks who do work around diversity, equity, and inclusion issues and might, for example, look at large national data sets showing the demographic representation of different groups in engineering, and perhaps analyzing trends and looking at factors like gender, race, ethnicity, socioeconomic background, looking across engineering disciplines, those types of things. Now, many of us also work with qualitative data. And this is perhaps where we start to diverge a bit from sort of mainstream engineering or technical fields, although I did show you some examples where even more traditional engineering or science fields use social science research techniques. But many of us also work with qualitative data. That could include data that's collected using interviews, focus groups, open-ended survey items. So again, in contrast to a scaled item where I'm asking you to strongly agree or disagree, I might be asking an open question like, why did you agree or disagree with a previous question, or responding to some other open-ended prompt, and also carrying out observations. So for many of us, collecting qualitative data could involve sitting in a classroom and observing what's going on and taking notes. It could involve going into the workplace and observing engineers at work. It could be going into a preschool classroom and observing what's going on as a teacher tries to introduce a sort of pre-engineering lesson to a group of preschoolers. So that would all be observational data. Now, there's also some very interesting intersections between engineering education and the humanities. So some of the coursework that we offer and some of the faculty in our department do work around the philosophy and history of engineering. So this is just a smattering of books that are well known in our field that are focused on various questions around the intersection of philosophy and engineering and history of engineering. And in some cases, a combination of the two. So we also have some interesting intersections here between what we would more broadly call the humanities and engineering. And we've had a number of students and faculty members who are actively engaged in this type of work as well. So here's a brief overview of some of the research areas in engineering education at Purdue, again, just to further ground some of the types of research that our faculty and graduate students are involved in. We have a number of faculty and graduate students who do work around diversity, inclusion, and equity. Much of this research is focused on reframing how we think about diversity, inclusion, and equity, and also designing improved interventions across educational levels with the goal of increasing equity and participation, especially of underrepresented groups in engineering education and practice. Many of our colleagues define frameworks and develop methods and design data infrastructures. So for example, defining and setting standards for quantitative and qualitative research methods, working with both big and small data sets, and developing a variety of tools that serve our community. And I should say there's actually a significant number of our graduate students and faculty who are focused on working with large data sets, employing a variety of data science and data analytic techniques. And some of these folks have actually gone off into industry and worked for companies like Amazon, for example, doing data science and data analytics work. Many of our faculty and students are concerned with affecting change in engineering education. This would be more of a research to practice focus, working with colleagues in other engineering disciplines to connect research findings to classroom practice. So for example, if we're studying teaching and learning in engineering, which would historically be one of the largest areas of research in our field, we want to make sure that the research findings from that work makes its way back in the classroom so it enhances the experience for students and faculty who are maybe taking some of those engineering courses that many of you have struggled through. So how can we do a better job teaching and supporting students as they work their way through the engineering curriculum? As I mentioned, there's a focus among many of our colleagues on improving pre-college engineering education. So how do we integrate engineering with the more traditional science, math, and language arts concepts and topics in pre-college classrooms, really ranging from, as I mentioned, preschool all the way up to the high school level? How do we engage learners and promote participation of a wide variety of demographic groups and students from a wide range of abilities and backgrounds? Finally, understanding and assessing how people learn. This could include studying difficult concepts in engineering. Just to give an example, for example, let's say we have students taking a core electrical engineering class, and we might be doing research trying to understand why some students struggle with particular technical concepts in the class, how those concepts may be a barrier to learning concepts that come later in the class, what we can do to improve or correct those misunderstandings, those sorts of things. But this also extends to studying professional skills, global skills, teamwork, ethics, entrepreneurship, and much more. And I would say this also extends into the workplace, studying engineers at work and engineering practice, trying to understand what engineers do day to day, what competency and skill demands what they're faced with, how do they develop their skills and capabilities, what kind of career progression do they have, how do they chart different career pathways, move into different industries and fields, etc. So if any of these topics are starting to sound interesting to you, I'm going to give a little overview of our graduate program and degree options. So we have three main degree options in engineering education at Purdue, and this starts at the lowest level with a graduate certificate and in teaching and learning in engineering. This is 9 credits of coursework plus 1 credit of a mentored teaching practicum. This is a certificate that's completed not only by graduate students in engineering education, but by graduate students from across the college. So for example, some of you might be looking at graduate degrees in other engineering fields, perhaps mechanical or electrical or aeronautical and astronautical. Many students in those fields elect to pursue the graduate certificate in teaching and learning in engineering, especially if they're considering going into a faculty career or position that has a significant teaching component. So they can really set themselves apart by getting a graduate certificate in teaching and learning and engineering if they're really finding a connection and passion with that teaching aspect of a future faculty position. And again, this is one of the ways I'm saying you could potentially distinguish yourself by taking courses or a certificate in teaching and learning and engineering, especially if you're interested in an academic career and going in the academic job market. So again, even if your research interests are more focused in the space of technical research, this could give you an edge and an advantage in the teaching aspects of your future academic career, or perhaps in industry as well. There's a huge amount of work in industry around professional development and training that could certainly be enriched by having some background in teaching and learning. Now, each of these degree options nests into the next level. So all of the courses for the graduate certificate can count toward the master's degree as well as the PhD. So the master's degree level is 30 credits of coursework taken face-to-face and or online. It's typically completed as a standalone degree or with a PhD in another engineering field. So again, for example, if you're working on a PhD in mechanical engineering, you could explore the possibility of getting a master's degree in engineering education if you wanted to further strengthen your focus in that area and perhaps even start to carve out an area of scholarship or research with a focus on engineering education. And we've had a handful of folks at Purdue do that over the years. Finally is the PhD in engineering education, which again allows you to build on those previous. So all the requirements of the certificate fit into the master's and then in turn fit into the PhD. The PhD is 90 credits beyond the bachelor's degree, 60 credits beyond the master's degree. This can be completed in parallel with a master's degree in some other engineering field. So for example, as I described, if you were getting a PhD in mechanical engineering, you could complete the master's in engineering education, and vice versa. If you were working on the PhD in engineering education, if you wanted to get a master's degree in another engineering field, that is certainly a possibility, and it's one that many of our students have taken advantage of. We also have a hybrid option for our PhD with some online and distance components that provide additional flexibility. So for example, We've had a number of students who've come to campus for maybe a year or two to get their core coursework and requirements completed, and then they go off and return back home or to their previous institution to resume duties there. We've had community college folks take sabbaticals or leave and come to us for a year, and then they go back and finish their PhD. And we do have a handful of students now that are doing a fully online option where they're sort of participating primarily remotely, but then coming to campus during either breaks or summers, and then the rest of their work is done from a remote location. Okay, so that's an overview of our 3 degree options. And in large part, these really map on what we would call a levels of inquiry framework. And the levels of inquiry framework are really focused on the teaching activity of engineering faculty members. The level 0 teacher is a teacher who teaches as they were taught. And so some of you may have encountered these types of teachers in your undergraduate or graduate coursework. I know I certainly did. The idea here is that you are probably most likely to adopt teaching techniques that you have encountered. So for example, if you primarily encounter lecturing in the classroom, that may be what you're inclined to primarily do when you go on to become a teacher yourself. Level 1 is an effective teacher. This is starting to use more accepted teaching theories and practices to become a more effective teacher. So for example, building in more active learning or collaborative learning into the classroom. Scholarly teachers spend more time assessing performance, making improvements, and maybe even publishing some of their results. This builds to the scholar of teaching and learning, which is engaging in educational experimentation and again, publishing and sharing results. And finally, at the top is the engineering education researcher, which is someone who is conducting educational research and publishing archival papers, for example, in respected journals in the field. In part, I would say that these levels of inquiry largely map onto the 3 degree options, where the graduate certificate moves individuals from sort of the teaching and effective teaching space up to scholarly teaching and scholar of teaching and learning. MS degree would really deepen expertise in the scholar of teaching and learning space and start to shade into educational research. And of course, the primary goal of the PhD degree as a research degree is to really train people as engineering education researchers, again, with that primary focus on social science research methods. So again, just to give you a flavor of the type of coursework that you might encounter in pursuing any one of our degree programs, we have a series of engineering education fundamentals classes. These are core classes that everyone in the field might take. As I mentioned, that ranges from things like history and philosophy of engineering to a course on leadership, policy, and change, to a course that's more focused on learning theories and development of engineering thinking, to a course that's more focused on instructional design called pedagogy, content, and assessment. Our students are also expected to have a pretty robust grounding in research preparation and specialization, including through a core or foundational engineering education inquiry class, followed by introductory research methods, typically introductory quantitative and qualitative methods. And then most of our students tend to have deeper specialization in either quantitative or qualitative methods. And again, that's just going to depend on their interests and the type of research they want to carry out. Our students are also expected to have some specialization, so taking some additional topical courses in areas that are relevant to engineering education. And finally, all of our students are expected to have some amount of secondary engineering expertise. So for our PhD students, for example, there's a requirement that everyone have at least 9 credits of graduate coursework in engineering. So we want to make sure that our students maintain some connection and grounding with engineering fields and disciplines. If a student comes into the program with a master's degree in engineering, then they have already met this requirement and don't need to necessarily take any additional engineering coursework. If anyone was interested in more detailed information about the plan of study, just let me know. There's information in our graduate program handbook and also on our website. I'd also wanted to share with you that in terms of PhD programs in engineering education, this is not only a new field, but it's a growing field. So the PhD program in engineering education at Purdue has been around for about 15 years now. We have more than 70 students in the program currently, and we have more than 110 alumni over those 15 years. However, I want to let you know we are not alone. These 4 schools were also some of the earliest to launch PhD programs and still have PhD programs in engineering education or science and engineering education. That includes Utah State, Clemson University, Virginia Tech, and Arizona State. Beyond that, there's a whole bunch of schools that are currently establishing program, including well-known locations such as Ohio State, University of Michigan, University of Cincinnati, Nebraska, etc. So if you end up looking at these schools, I would encourage you to take a look at their courses and programs in engineering education, and consider maybe enhancing your graduate experience by engaging with these types of topics and courses. This is my last slide before I'm going to open it up to some question and answer time. A few words real quick on our application, admission, and funding process. So our application for the PhD program has 4 required statements: a statement of purpose, a research statement, a teaching statement, and a diversity statement. You'd also be required to submit your academic transcripts, a copy of your CV or resume, 3 references, and a list of prospective advisors. We've recently changed our policies, so GRE scores are not required or considered as a part of the review process. So hopefully that lowers the bar to the application process for some of you. However, the TOEFL scores are still required for non-native speakers according to the graduate school policies at Purdue. Applications for fall admission are due December 15, and we do also consider applications for off-cycle admission. Those applications are due September 15, so if you're looking at a spring admission, you would have to wait until next year. So the earliest admissions we're considering right now would be for fall of 2021. Regarding admission, applications are welcomed from those holding or completing either a bachelor's degree or a master's degree. Most applicants to our program have at least one prior degree in engineering or another STEM field. However, this is not a rigid requirement. So if you don't have, or you're not completing a degree in engineering or another STEM field, feel free to set up a call or send me an email, and we can chat more about whether you might be a fit for the program. For example, we've had some students go through the program with backgrounds in education and sociology. In terms of funding, our PhD students are typically fully funded for the duration of their studies, and we have a number of internal and external fellowships available that can provide additional support, especially for students' own research. At this time, the online master's degree is a self-funded program, so we do not, unfortunately, have financial support for the online master's degree or the graduate certificate program. But again, if you're coming to Purdue anyway, you could typically take the certificate or the master's under your tuition remission, so it would not necessarily cost you anything additional to complete that, to complete the master's or the certificate if you're already a Purdue graduate student in another field. It might slow you down a little bit, but it would be covered under your existing tuition remission. If you'd like to learn more about the program, we do have a virtual open house coming up. That's scheduled in just a couple weeks, October 15 and 16. I have a link here, or you can go to our website to learn more about that and to sign up or register if you'd like to attend all or part of that event. We have a weekly research seminar that you'll be able to participate in that is being delivered by one of our own faculty members. You'll have an opportunity to learn more about our degree programs, facilities, and research groups. You'll be able to network with and learn from our current graduate students in a variety of formal and informal online environments, and you'll have an opportunity to meet one-on-one with our faculty. We also have a program brochure that's online. I can paste these links in just a moment if you want to follow these. The program brochure has more detailed program information for all of our degree options, has faculty profiles and an overview of all our major research areas in somewhat more depth than what I was able to cover today, has some information about our alumni and career pathways, and has application and admission information, again, beyond what I was able to share here. So at this point, I would like to open it up for questions. And while we give you a few minutes to put any questions you might have in the chat, I will go ahead and paste those 2 links into the chat window. So just bear with me a minute while we do that. So I've pasted in the link to our virtual open house. And so I want to encourage you to check that out and consider attending if you'd like to learn more about the program and meet more of our faculty and students. I also have a link there to our graduate program handbook, as well as my email address. You're always welcome to follow up with me with additional questions or set up a time to chat. I'm always happy to meet with students to answer any questions and get to know you as you get to know us. So thank you again for your time and attention. And I'm happy to hang out for a few minutes and chat with anyone. or answer any questions that you might have.
So there are a few questions in the chat. So if I just read them to you, then you can answer them, and then you can let me know when to read the next one.
That'd be great. Thanks.
Okay. First question, if I know I want to get a PhD, but I cannot commit to full-time yet, would it be advised to start the master's program?
Yeah, this is a good question. The upside of starting the master's program before the PhD is that you do have that flexibility, and all of our most or all of our E&E classes are offered in an online format. That's something we were working on prior to the COVID pandemic, so we were sort of timely in that regard, that now we have mechanisms for our students to participate remotely in most of our classes. And if you perform well in those classes and you're enjoying the program and want to continue with a PhD, then it's relatively easy to gain admission because we've gotten to know you and you've gotten to know us. So from what I've seen, students who start in the program as a non-degree or a master's student usually fare well in terms of gaining admission. Of course, the downside to that is that we only have funding available for our PhD students. So taking those part-time courses would have a financial implication for you. Of course, there are loans available, but unfortunately, we don't have sources of financial support. I know some of the students with us have been able to take advantage of tuition benefits as well, depending on their current affiliation and job. So yeah, that's certainly a possibility. And in fact, for some students, we can also do what's called a non-degree admit. And that's even easier and doesn't have the same sort of timelines associated with it. So if you're eager to jump in and you want to talk about non-degree admission, it's a streamlined application process, which basically lets you take up to 3 classes, 3 graduate courses without being formally admitted. So that would be another pathway in. And of course, after you take a couple classes, you could always seek admission to the PhD program. So I hope that helps answer your question. And Ashley, I see some of the other questions here, so I'm just going to go ahead and work through those. So there's a great question here about, do our MS and PhD students collaborate with or take classes in the College of Education? Yes, absolutely. In fact, we have a lot of faculty and graduate students who collaborate with or work with our colleagues over there. We have actually one faculty member, Professor Musin Maneksha, who is jointly appointed in the College of Education as well. So that's a very formal link to that college. I would say those activities are probably more intensive in the pre-college space. So if you look at our Inspire Institute, Inspire is our Institute for Pre-College Engineering Education Research. Many of the faculty and students who are affiliated with Inspire have connections or collaborate with folks in the College of Education because, again, College of Education at Purdue is primarily focused on pre-college settings. So there's a natural connection and natural synergy there. If you'd like more specific examples, let me know. I'd be happy to share those. But again, if you look through our faculty profiles and especially look at our Inspire Institute website, you'll get a sense for what some of those collaborations and connections are. Many of our students also take graduate coursework in the College of Education, often topical classes that would be relevant to our field as well as to the College of Education. It's also very common for our students to take methods coursework from the College of Education. So, for example, many of our students take introductory and advanced introduction to qualitative methods from departments, a department called EDCI, which is in the College of Education. So yeah, it's pretty common for our students to take courses over there. All right, any other questions I can answer? Great questions so far.
Dr. Jessica, how many students come into the PhD program per year, each year, average?
Yeah, that's a great question. Thanks, Azizi. Our cohorts can range pretty widely in size, but it's typically between 10 and 20 students. Our largest cohorts have been about 20 students. But on average, in recent years, it's been about a dozen students coming in every year. That means we have a pretty strong cohort model in our PhD program. So most of our students begin in the fall, and they go through those first years of coursework together. So we typically have pretty strong bonds and community with our graduate students as in cohorts as they move through the program. And I know some of those cohort connections last well beyond graduation. Many of our students build very strong professional networks through those cohorts. So we do have a strength in terms of the size and vitality of the graduate student community. It is a pretty vibrant community, and the cohorts really help support one another through the transition process coming into graduate school, but then as students move through coursework and then into research, there's a strong cohort support system sort of in place. So I have a great question from Shubham. Sorry if I'm mispronouncing that. Could you discuss some of the research projects that you have for PhD students for fall of 2021? I can give you a sense of some of my two of my current projects, which if someone came into my research group, they might be involved in. But again, looking across the School of Engineering Education, there's a huge variety of people and projects. So please, take a look at other faculty members to get a sense for that variety. I have two active research projects right now. One is looking at student and professional perceptions of ethics and social responsibility. So we had previously conducted a longitudinal study. That means we're sort of tracking over time undergraduate student perceptions of ethics and social responsibility. So we did a series of surveys and a series of interviews with engineering students looking at how they think about ethics and social responsibility in engineering. And now we're following some of that group as they go out into the workforce and go out to graduate school to see how those perceptions change or don't change. And we're also surveying a larger group of participants to look at differences across industry sectors and look at across different companies and different engineering disciplines to see if there are significant differences in perceptions and priorities around ethics and social responsibility in engineering fields and industries. So that's one of our big projects that we have going on now, and that I potentially recruiting students into for coming years. And then the other project that I have is research doing field work, doing observational studies of engineers in industry. So this is actually going out into the workplace or trying to go out into the workplace and observe engineers at work to better understand what they do on a day-to-day basis. And also using new fieldwork methods to do that. So we're using methods from the field of anthropology. So if you've heard of ethnography, ethnographic observation is a form of fieldwork that's very common in anthropology and many other social science fields. So we're trying out a wider variety of ethnographic field methods to study what engineers do on the job. That work's gotten a little bit disrupted because of the COVID pandemic. So we're sort of a little bit on hold, sort of taking that project slow right now. But we hope that as things maybe start to open up and return to normal, we'll be able to do more on-site observation of engineers at work and or get more access to do field studies where we're actually coming in and observing through media like this, through platforms like Zoom or through Microsoft Teams or through various knowledge management systems. So that's just a sample of two projects that I'm involved in. Again, my focus is primarily doing research on engineering practice and professional skills, but I mentioned a lot of other topics. So if you're interested in any of those, please, check out our website, check out our handbook, go look at faculty members' websites, or shoot me an email, and I'm happy to connect you with faculty or research projects that might be closer to your area of interest. But great question. Thank you.
There's about 4 minutes left of this session, if anyone has any other questions.
So I see a question here about how many students apply to the PhD program each year. This can vary pretty widely. I would say our average is probably in the range of 35 to 40 students applying every year. So that means our yield in terms of the students we make offers to or offer admission to is probably about 50% or less typically. But again, that can vary pretty widely. We're actually expecting probably a slightly higher number of applications this year, in part because of the changing economy and different situations that people are in. We saw something similar back in 2008, 2009.
Dr. Jessica, do you know, have you guys discussed for future years the GRE requirements, if you're going to keep those?
If I had a crystal ball, I would suspect we will not have the GRE requirement going forward. We currently have a 1-year policy in place to waive it. And after 1 year, we're going to revisit that again. So by this time next year, I would be able to tell you whether we're going to require it for the following year's applications. But I suspect not, but I can't make any promises until we make that determination.
Thank you.
Yep. Thanks for asking. So thank you all so much for joining us. Again, I would just urge you, if you would like to learn more about our faculty and program, check out our upcoming open house. Go ahead and register for that. We'll get you more information. Also happy to have you follow up with emails or set up a meeting anytime. Just let me know. Enjoy the rest of the expo. Thanks again for joining us.
Thank you.